The scent of burning sugar hung heavy in the air, a sickly sweet counterpoint to the bitterness brewing inside me. I was meticulously drizzling caramel over what would surely be another perfect anniversary cake, a futile effort to plaster over the widening cracks in my life. 10 years of perfecting his favorite dishes, of ensuring his shirts were pressed just so, of turning our house into a home while he pursued his passion. He'd walk in any minute, demanding a pristine environment, a hot meal, and a serene wife. And I, like a well-oiled machine, would deliver. It wasn't always like this. There were moments, fleeting as butterfly wings, when I genuinely believed we were building something together. Early mornings, whispering dreams into the dawn. Late nights, tangled limbs and shared laughter. But those moments had been systematically chipped away, replaced by a growing silence that echoed louder than any argument. His disdain had become a second skin, thin and transparent, revealing the contempt beneath. Every sigh, every raised eyebrow, every dismissive wave of his hand was a chisel, slowly carving away at my spirit. I'd started to flinch when he entered a room, my muscles tensing, my breath catching. My reflection showed a woman I barely recognized, a pale imitation of the vibrant person I once was, her eyes hollow, her smile a forgotten curve. The doorbell chimed, a harsh intrusion. He was early. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I smoothed down my apron, a nervous habit, and walked towards the sound, each step feeling heavier than the last. He stood there, impeccable in his designer suit, a briefcase clutched in one hand, a familiar sneer already forming on his lips. He didn't even wait for me to speak. "What is that smell?" he demanded, wrinkling his nose. "Are you making another one of your ridiculously sweet concoctions? Honestly, you spend all day puttering around in here. What exactly do you do?" My grip tightened on the doorknob. The caramel scent, once a symbol of my effort, now felt like an accusation. I bit back the retort, the years of practice silencing the anger that flared within me. This was our anniversary. I had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that today would be different. I tried to keep my voice even, a practiced calm that betrayed the hurricane swirling inside. "It's our anniversary, I thought a cake would be nice." He scoffed, dropping his briefcase with a thud that echoed through the quiet house. "Nice? What's nice about another one of your saccharine creations? You know I prefer something savory. But then, you rarely consider what I prefer, do you?" He walked past me, his expensive cologne a sharp, unwelcome scent, and tossed his jacket onto the sofa, a gesture of casual disrespect that always grated. "Honestly, what have you been doing all day? The house looks lived in. Not like the pristine sanctuary I work so hard to provide for." My hands clenched, the tips of my fingers digging into my palms. Lived in. As if our home were a sterile museum, and I, the curator, had failed. He spoke of his hard work, his provision, as if my days were spent in idle leisure, as if the countless hours I poured into making this house a home, managing his schedule, entertaining his clients, and smoothing over his frequent outbursts were simply nothing. "I've been managing the household as I always do," I said, the words feeling brittle. "And I also spent the afternoon meeting with a financial advisor." He stopped mid-stride, turning slowly, a dark look crossing his face. "A financial advisor? And why, precisely, would you need to do that? Do you think I'm not capable of handling our finances? Are you questioning my ability to provide for us?" His voice was low, dangerous. "No, I started, but he cut me off. "You know what your problem is." He stepped closer, his shadow falling over me. "You're restless. You think you need more. You always want more. But you bring nothing to this marriage. Absolutely nothing. I provide everything. This house, your clothes, your hobbies. You are entirely dependent on me." He gestured around the living room, a sweeping indictment. "Look around. What part of this, what single thing can you say you genuinely contributed? Nothing. You are a drain, an empty vessel I fill." The words, cold and sharp, pierced through the last vestiges of my carefully constructed composure. You bring nothing to this marriage. His voice, dripping with contempt, echoed in the sudden ringing silence. It was then, in that precise moment, that something inside me snapped. The years of quiet resentment, of swallowed words and forced smiles, coalesced into a molten core of resolve. I met his gaze, and for the first time in a very long time I didn't flinch. My eyes, I knew, were no longer hollow. There was a spark there, a quiet inferno. I reached into the pocket of my apron, my fingers closing around the cool, crisp paper I had been carrying all day. Is that so? I said, my voice surprisingly steady, even to my own ears. And then I pulled them out. The neatly folded, official documents. The divorce papers. His eyes, which moments before had held such dismissive contempt, now widened in disbelief. His jaw, set in a perpetual sneer, actually slackened. He stared at the papers in my hand as if they were a venomous snake, then at my face, searching for a trace of the woman he thought he knew, the docile, accommodating wife. He found none. What is this? He finally stammered. His voice stripped of its usual bravado. The carefully constructed facade of the all-powerful patriarch began to crumble, revealing a flicker of something I hadn't seen in years. Fear. These, I stated, my voice steady and clear, are the divorce papers. They've been drawn up, and all they need is your signature. I extended my arm, holding them out to him, daring him to take them. He recoiled as if burned. Divorce? Are you mad? This is ridiculous. What could possibly possess you to do something so drastic? We have a life here. Home. My career. His voice rose with each word, panic starting to lace his tone. You can't just throw everything away. Throw everything away. I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. No, you've been doing that for years. Chipping away at me, at us, piece by piece. You called me an empty vessel, a drain. You said I bring nothing to this marriage. I stepped closer, closing the distance between us, forcing him to meet my gaze. Well, consider this my contribution. The end of a charade. The freedom for both of us. His face flushed, a mottled red that clashed with his pale shock. This is blackmail. Some kind of pathetic power play. Do you think I'll just sign these? Do you think I'll let you walk away with half of everything I've built? He sneered again, regaining a sliver of his usual arrogance. You think you're so smart, but you forget who holds all the cards. Without me, you are nothing. You'll be alone, destitute. You have no career, no prospects. What will you do? Where will you go? A quiet strength, a resolve I hadn't known I possessed, settled deep within me. I don't need your cards, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it resonated with an undeniable force. And I won't be alone. I'll have myself. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like more than enough. I laid the papers on the polished mahogany table between us, a silent challenge. Sign them. Or don't. Either way, this marriage is over. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken words, with the shattering of expectations, and the echoes of a life unlived. He stared at the papers, then at me, then back at the papers, a storm raging in his eyes. He picked up the papers, his fingers trembling ever so slightly, a telltale sign that his composure was a thin veneer. He unfolded them, his eyes scanning the legalese, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. I watched him, a detached observer, as if viewing a scene unfold on a stage. The man who had just declared I brought nothing to our marriage was now confronted with the tangible proof of my agency, my contribution to its definitive end. He muttered something under his breath, a low growl of disbelief and resentment. He looked up at me again, his gaze searching, trying to find the vulnerability he was so accustomed to exploiting. But it wasn't there. The woman standing before him was no longer the one who meticulously baked his anniversary cakes and tolerated his casual cruelties. This woman was calm, resolute, and utterly at peace with her decision. This is a mistake, he finally said. his voice regaining some of its usual force, though still tinged with a desperate edge. "You're making a huge mistake. You'll regret this. Mark my words, you'll come crawling back." A ghost of a smile touched my lips. "I don't think so," I replied, the certainty in my voice a powerful counterpoint to his bluster. "I've spent too long crawling. It's time to stand up." He slammed the papers down onto the table, the sharp sound echoing in the silence. "Fine," he bit out, his face contorted in a mask of fury. "If this is what you want, then so be it. But don't expect a penny more than what's legally mandated. You'll get nothing from me, just like you brought nothing to me." His words, meant as a final, crushing blow, landed instead as a confirmation. They validated everything I had just done. He was incapable of seeing beyond his own narrow perception, incapable of acknowledging the years of silent sacrifice, the emotional labor, the unwavering support that had been the invisible foundation of his successful life. He still believed he was the sole provider, the giver, and I, the perpetual receiver. But I knew better. And for the first time in a decade, that knowledge was a source of profound strength, not quiet despair. The bitterness of the burning sugar was replaced by the clean, sharp scent of freedom. The air in the room felt lighter, the silence no longer heavy with unspoken resentment, but pregnant with possibility. He stood there, fuming, his face a thundercloud. And I, for the first time, felt the sun on mine. I turned and walked away from the table, away from him, towards the front door. I didn't need to say another word. The papers, lying starkly on the polished mahogany, said it all. The sound of the front door clicking shut behind me was not an ending, but a resounding beginning. I didn't glance back at the house that had, for so long, felt more like a gilded cage than a home. The air outside was crisp, carrying the faint, earthy scent of damp soil from a recent rain. Smelled like possibility. I walked, not towards any particular destination but simply away. My feet, encased in sensible, comfortable shoes, seemed to possess a lightness they hadn't known in years. Each step felt deliberate, a conscious act of reclaiming ownership over my own movement. The initial surge of adrenaline from the confrontation began to recede, leaving behind a quiet hum of something akin to euphoria. It wasn't loud or boisterous. It was a deep, steady current of peace. My mind, usually a chaotic swirl of his demands and my anxieties, was surprisingly clear. I thought of the countless hours I'd spent curating his life, arranging his appointments, remembering his preferences, and anticipating his moods. It was as if a heavy, invisible burden had been lifted from my shoulders, and with it, the constant low-level hum of dread that had become my background noise. The world around me seemed to sharpen into focus. The vibrant green of the trees, the cheerful chirping of birds, the distant laughter of children playing in a park. These were sounds and sights I had barely registered for years, muted by the suffocating atmosphere of my marriage. Now they were vivid, almost overwhelmingly present. I found myself at a small, unassuming coffee shop I'd passed countless times but never entered. Its window displayed a cozy interior, a few people hunched over laptops, others engaged in quiet conversation. A sense of genuine curiosity stirred within me. Without a second thought, I pushed open the door, the bell above it tinkling a welcoming chime. Inside, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries enveloped me. It was a simple scent, yet it felt like a revelation after the cloying sweetness of my own caramel and the acrid tang of his disapproval. I ordered a black coffee, something I rarely allowed myself, and found a small table by the window. As I sipped the bitter, invigorating liquid, I looked out at the street. People walked by, each absorbed in their own world, their own lives. And for the first time in a long, long time I felt like I was one of them. A person, not just an extension of someone else's existence. I was unburdened, unconstrained. The future stretched before me, a blank canvas, daunting in its emptiness, yet thrilling in its potential. There was no immediate plan, no grand strategy. Just the quiet understanding that the woman who had walked out of that house was fundamentally different from the woman who had walked in 10 years prior. She was a survivor, stripped bare of illusions and ready to truly live. The coffee, once a rare indulgence, became a daily ritual, a quiet moment of reflection before the day truly began. The first few days were a blur of practicalities. Opening a new bank account, finding a temporary apartment, changing my address on every official document imaginable. Each task, no matter how mundane, felt like a small victory, a brick laid in the foundation of my new life. I discovered a surprising resilience within myself. For years, he had chipped away at my self-worth, convincing me of my utter dependence. But now, without his constant criticism echoing in my ears, I found I could navigate the world just fine. Better even. The fear that had once paralyzed me began to dissipate, replaced by a growing sense of competence. One afternoon, rummaging through boxes of what felt like a stranger's belongings, I unearthed a set of old paintbrushes and a half-used tube of cadmium yellow. I hadn't painted in over a decade, not since before the marriage, when art had been my passion, my escape. He'd once dismissively called it a childish hobby, and I, eager to please, had quietly put my brushes away. Now, holding them again, a faint spark ignited within me. The next day I found a small art supply store, its aisles smelling of turpentine and possibility. I bought a cheap canvas, a few new tubes of paint, and a small easel. My first few strokes were clumsy, uncertain, like learning to walk again. But with each brushstroke, a memory resurfaced, a technique rediscovered, a dormant part of myself reawakened. I painted for hours, sometimes until dawn, letting the colors spill onto the canvas, mirroring the emotions I was finally allowing myself to feel. The vibrant yellows of new hope, the deep blues of lingering sadness, the fiery reds of unspoken anger. There was no pressure, no judgment, just the pure, unadulterated joy of creation. My small apartment, initially stark and impersonal, slowly began to reflect me. My paintings, raw and imperfect, adorned the walls. Books, once relegated to dusty shelves, were now scattered everywhere, their pages dog-eared from eager reading. I started cooking for myself again, not his preferred savory dishes, but the comforting sweet treats I truly loved, filling the air with scents that were finally my own. I still had moments of quiet apprehension. The road ahead was long, uncertain. There were financial realities to face, a new career path to forge. But the fear was no longer paralyzing. It was a healthy dose of reality, a motivator rather than a deterrent. For the first time I was charting my own course, navigating by my own stars. He had said I brought nothing to the marriage. And in his narrow world, perhaps that was true. But leaving it, I realized I had brought everything. Myself, whole and unbroken, ready to build a life far richer than any he could have ever imagined. The canvas of my new life was unfurling, and I finally held the brush.